Hello, fellow Kenyans. So, when people wonder how we ended up with Ruto as president, maybe younger Kenyans might not remember, but there are a number of steps that happened, and each dovetailed into the other and ended up basically directing us or forcing us into a path whereby, one way or another, whether it was Uhuru or Ruto or any other person, there was very little chance that we were going to end up with a progressive president, with a president who listens to the public, a president who's responsive to the cries of the people, a president who's compassionate toward the poor. We always seemed destined to end up with a dictator, with a person who doesn't care, a person who is corrupt. And here is what happened. Unfortunately, the problem begins with one of Kenya's most favorite presidents, President Mwai Kibaki. In the year 2012, Kibaki tried very hard to force into the new constitution a law that would allow what we used to call provincial commissioners, but this time under the name county commissioners. According to the 2010 constitution, there was no place for county commissioners, but Kibaki wanted them because of the fear that without that he would lose control of the county governments at a time when Raila and his party ODM were really popular. And hence, those of you who would remember, there was a county commissioner who was being used quite a bit to harass Hassan Joho in Mombasa. And all the coastal MPs and members of the opposition, there was quite an attempt by the Kibaki government to bring them to toe the line using the county commissioners. So in December of 2012, one of Kenya's most gallant judges, Judge Mumbi Ngugi, who later on was, I don't know where they took her to, but Mumbi Ngugi ruled in December of 2012. She said President Kibaki flouted provisions of the constitution by creating non-existent positions of county commissioners and appointing people to fill them in disregard of the constitution. Of course, what happened, Kibaki kept on appealing. Eventually he succeeded and the county commissioners were allowed into the constitution. Up to today, as we speak, there is no need for county commissioners, and it's a big problem for us because they're the people who are being used by the central government to try and sit on top of the citizens and stop us from being free, the freedom that our new constitution envisaged.
One of the architects of the Constitution of Kenya enacted in 2010, Dr. Ikuru Aukot, says the provincial administration has no place in the current dispensation.
As a matter of fact, the county commissioners are not constitutional.
The very following year, in 2013, something else happened, something unbelievable, but this one happened in the court of law. At this time, Uhuru and Ruto had been taken to The Hague to answer to charges of human rights abuses, crimes against humanity, some very serious crimes. And the spirit of our 2010 constitution was such that anybody accused of any crime, whether it be theft or whatever, anybody suspected, anybody who comes under the suspicion of having committed a crime of any sort, impropriety of some sort, needed to stand down and not run for a public office. In fact, if he was already in public office, the best the constitution hoped for was that they would resign and leave the office. But in that year, in 2013, when some people had gone to court to force Uhuru and Ruto to not run for the president's position and the deputy president's position, a court ruled that Uhuru and Ruto could actually run.
The High Court dismissed an integrity case against Jubilee presidential candidate Uhuru Kenyatta and his running mate William Ruto, clearing the way for them to seek votes from Kenyans in next month's general election.
And this was against the spirit of the constitution. By allowing these two guys to run while serious crimes were hanging over their heads and there was a court case running at the ICC, we basically enabled impunity to take root. This, of course, dovetailed into the county commissioners by Kibaki, which was another attempt to change our 2010 constitution and revert back to the previous constitution, which had basically given as an imperial president. Now that was another step backwards, which led us straight into the arms of dictatorship and impunity. And something else happened in the year 2014. For those who might not remember, for Gen Zs who might have been too young then, or who perhaps are not old enough to understand, that in 2014, the Ruto government, as they used to call themselves, forced through parliament a law, a security law, that did several things. But basically, it promised to make us a police state. One of the things it did, initially, the police commissioner, the police inspector general, was to be appointed by a body, an independent body created to oversee that process, and the president would only be given 3 names to choose from. Uhuru, again fearing Raila, forced through parliament a law that basically brought the police back into the control of the president. That is why, as we stand, the Inspector General of the Police has no autonomy. He has no freedom to make his own decisions. He acts basically as the arm doing of State House, and that is one of the problems we are facing currently. Because in my understanding, although there's a provision of the Constitution that specifies in what ways the president can be impeached, but the understanding of the spirit of the Constitution, in my humble view, I'm not a lawyer, but this is my humble view as a journalist, is that the Constitution envisaged a possibility where the Inspector of Police, the Inspector General of Police, could probably walk to State House and tell the President that, Mr. President, we are here to arrest you on charges of abuse of office. Now, once the provision of the Inspector of Police being appointed by an independent body was removed, and that right given to the President, we basically fell back into the place where the President himself can dictate to the Inspector General exactly how the police would behave. And this is why we ended up toward the end of Uhuru's regime. We had bodies being discovered everywhere. And now with Ruto as president, and unfortunately we ended up with a president who has very little respect for the law and for the provisions of the Constitution. A president who sees himself as imperial. You remember when he sat in State House with the Chief Justice, and he had the Chief Justice sitting almost like a student in a classroom, while he sat in front like the headmaster of the school. That tells us a lot how President Ruto sees the Constitution, sees the office of the President, considers the office of the Chief Justice and everybody else. My interpretation is that Ruto sees himself as sort of the headmaster and everybody else a student. Everybody else pays homage to his office. His understanding of the separation of powers as elucidated in the Constitution is very little, is very minimal, because the spirit of the Constitution, as far as the separation of powers goes, is that the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature are 3 equal partners living in sort of tension. When it reaches a point where the Speaker of Parliament acts like the head boy of a school and the President is the headmaster, with the head boy taking instructions from the headmaster, then we have lost the spirit of our Constitution. The Constitution wants the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary to live in some kind of tension. It does not want them to get together, because when they get together, it means dictatorship for the citizens. The Constitution wants the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive to be jostling for position and nobody giving in to the other except according to the law. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how we have ended up with President William Ruto. This is how we've ended up with the Speaker of Parliament being Moses Wetangula, who doesn't seem to have a mind of his own. He basically seems to be the rubber stamp boy of State House. And these are some of the things that make it very cardinal that we must go back and review our position. One of the ways in which we can review our position and try and progress our constitution and our systems of governance, is by recalling the MPs that we think are not listening to the citizens. When we recall the MPs, we can give the new ones and Parliament in general new instructions. You listen to the voice of the citizens. State House is not your boss. Your boss are the citizens of this country. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is one way by which we can reclaim the democratic space that we have lost to the executive. We want the Parliament to listen to the voices of the people, not the voices of State House. Thank you for listening. Until our next video, God bless you.